Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Wednesday, February 26th. If you are just tuning in, we just went over the NBA Power Rankings. In this segment, we turn our attention to the NFL. What would a perfect offseason look like for the NFC West champions, the Los Angeles Rams? But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you're on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Wednesday, February 26th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into a little bit about what the dream offseason, what a perfect offseason might look like for the Los Angeles Rams. The Rams, of course, last season went 10-7. They won the NFC West, securing a spot in the playoffs, winning a game in the playoffs before losing in the divisional round to the Philadelphia Eagles. This is a really good Rams team, a Rams team that took the Eagles to the brink, came down to a fourth down by 8 after it seemed like the game was over in the snow. They're the team that pushed the Eagles the furthest to the brink the most, right? This was the team that played them the toughest, and now we look at where they stand, and it seems like this is a team that's imploding on itself. They're a team that has $40 million, around $40 million in cap space, good enough for 15th in the NFL. They're right in the middle there. They have the money to make some moves, but they have had a really interesting start to the offseason, right? They've said to start the offseason that they would be trading Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp, who did not seem interested in getting traded, the Rams came to him and said, hey, we're going to look at shopping you around. Cooper Kupp did not have his greatest season last year. He's come back as a true wide receiver to this season, especially after what happened with Puka Nacua. Puka Nacua has come in and really stepped up, been that true number one for Matthew Stafford and the Rams. But Cooper Kupp still seemed happy with his number 2 role, but he's expensive for a number 2 receiver, and now they're looking at moving off of him. And then the big news came out. They let Matthew Stafford look for a trade. Matthew Stafford, who we talked about earlier this week, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now, a top 10 quarterback, no doubt, in my opinion, top 8. But Matthew Stafford is sitting there, and he is looking at getting paid more money. He's a guy that won a Super Bowl with the Rams once since coming over from the Detroit Lions. He's a great quarterback. He's 37. The Rams don't really want to pay him that $50 million that he's asking for. And to go with all that, Jonah Jackson, one of their starting offensive linemen, has also been given permission to ask for a trade. Jonah Jackson not even on the free agent list right now, of which they have 16 free agents. They've got 16 unrestricted free agents, A lot of them are going to be very important and are starting pieces for them. You've got your top 2 left tackles in Joseph Noteboom and Ulrich Jackson. Depending on who you want to keep, you have to keep one of those two. You have your number 3 and number 4 receivers, 3, 4, and 5 receivers in DeMarcus Robinson, Tutu Atwell, and Tyler Johnson, all of which have made pretty big plays throughout the season for the Rams. You also have a big piece of that defensive line that was so effective, especially in the playoffs, in Michael Hoyt, a linebacker in Christian Roseboom, and a corner who played nearly 50% of the snaps in Ahkello Witherspoon. But the other really interesting piece of it, with them seemingly moving off of Matthew Stafford, the second quarterback on the roster would have been Jimmy Garoppolo. But Jimmy Garoppolo also a pending free agent this season. The only rostered quarterback for them right now, as we speak, is Stetson Bennett. And that's not the way that you want to go. Now, this is a team that we talked about yesterday. Jimmy Garoppolo, I think, could fit into that tier of quarterback like we're seeing with a Brock Purdy, like we're seeing with a Jared Goff, right? That's the kind of tier quarterback that we've seen Jimmy Garoppolo be, and this is the kind of system that he would be successful in, of course. But Jimmy Garoppolo, is a free agent. So they need to make this decision. Are you keeping Matthew Stafford? Because they said they'd be comfortable with rolling with Jimmy Garoppolo going into next season, which is questionable as it is. Jimmy Garoppolo, I think, has the ability to be a Jared Goff level quarterback, but he also has the ability to be a Daniel Jones level quarterback. And we've seen both, especially with it without an offensive line, their biggest weakness this season, and two offensive linemen being free agents, one of them being being on the trade block. It's not a good time for you to turn your franchise, especially a franchise that's so close to being a Super Bowl level franchise, to a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo. I think he could work in this system because his ceiling is Jared Goff, and Jared Goff took this team to the Super Bowl, right? But also, we've seen his floor, and his floor is just too scary for them to really rely on. And so that leaves them, if they do decide to move off of Matthew Stafford, if they do decide we're not going to trade Matthew Stafford, who do they target in free agency? Do they go get a quarterback? Do they re-sign Jimmy Garoppolo? Do they go out and get Sam Darnold for his asking price? Sam Darnold, another guy who in that tier, like a Jimmy Garoppolo, I just don't really think fits with the offensive line in the state it is. Do they re-sign some of their receivers? Do they go out and get a tier 2 receiver like a Brandon Cooks, a return, or a Robert Woods return, or a Darius Slayton speedster, or a KJ Osborne that can come in and be a pretty good help for this team? Do they go address the cornerbacks in free agency, get a guy like Tre'Davious White, who's a little bit older, kind of lost a step, go and get a Rasul Douglas potentially, or do they spend all the money on the offensive line? Go and get Ronnie Stanley, who's a free agent from the Ravens. Go and spend money to go get a young Jedrick Wills to play the tackle positions. What do you do at this point? Because there are lots of ways to go for this team. I think the dream offseason, obviously, we're going to say it's impossible to keep Matt Stafford at this point. Although I do think they will keep Matt Stafford. If they're able to keep Matt Stafford, you hold on to him, and then you just go full in on the offensive line. You go full in on the offensive line, get a Ronnie Stanley, get a Jedrick Wills, re-sign your favorite between Joseph Noteboom and Ulrich Jackson. Re-sign one of those two. Bring back Jimmy Garoppolo as a backup, just in case, but see what you can get for Matthew Stafford. In the event that you trade Matthew Stafford, it's a lot tougher. I think in that event, you go out and you get Aaron Rodgers. I know that's not a super popular opinion, but I think you might be able to get Rodgers pretty cheap right now. Not a veteran minimum contract, but I think if you're able to get Rodgers cheap, or maybe a guy like Russell Wilson could come in. But I think Rodgers can still revive his career here. If people are counting on Sam Darnold, people are counting on Jimmy Garoppolo for this team, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to trust a 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers. I just really don't understand the difference between those two. At wide receiver, you do need to get someone else besides Puka. As good as Puka is, and he is arguably probably a top 5 receiver in the NFL right now, if you're getting rid of Cooper Kupp, which it sounds like they're planning on getting rid of him, you need to bring in someone else, whether that be through the draft or through the free agency. You need to get someone that can play opposite and still play that Rams style of football. So I'm looking at a guy that either has or has the ability to. KJ Osborne, I like a lot. Brandon Cooks, or a speedster in Darius Slayton. When it comes to the draft, they're picking at number 26. And we've talked about the offensive line. I think it's crucial that they address that position, especially if they're not able to get two really good ones in free agency. Go and get a guy like Armand Membu out of Missouri. If he's not available, Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State University is one of the better tackles. Obviously, his name isn't as big as it could be because he went to an FCS school, but an FCS school that is known for running the rock and just being hard-nosed football. If you're going to trade, if neither of those guys are available, and if you go and address that offensive line issue in free agency, go out and get a cornerback. Go and target one of the top 3 corners. Maybe a Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. Maybe you get a Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame, although he's starting to slip on some draft boards, so that's something to look out for. This is a team that could go in a lot of different directions. I think overall, what their general plan should be keep this team together. I don't like trading Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford. Keep them together for one more year. But if you have to trade one of them, if you have to trade both of them, bring an offensive line in as soon as possible and bring back Jimmy Garoppolo or bring in Aaron Rodgers. I think that's the move for them. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think the Rams should do? What is their perfect offseason? I'd love to hear it. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we go over what an MLB season might look like for the reigning champions of the NL Central. The Milwaukee Brewers won their division, bounced in the wild card yet again. Can they improve? What did their offseason do for their chances? We're going to talk about that and much more coming up next. You're on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.